Good evening. We would like to get started at this time. My name is Donna Liggins. I'm the president of the NAACP. I would like to welcome you to this evening's community forum. It's called Project Hoodie. Over the last few months throughout this country, there has been a national outcry, justice for Trayvon, the 17-year-old young man who was murdered in Sanford, Florida, because he looked suspicious being black and wearing a hoodie. This community forum is to broaden the conversation and start a movement to get justice for Trayvon by getting justice for all of us. There cannot at any time be justice as long as we're judged by what we look like, by what we wear, and where we live. There can never be justice when in our school children of color leads in the categories of suspensions, expulsions, dropout, and incarceration. And in our community, African Americans have the double-digit unemployment, highest death rate because of no health care. Tonight, the NAACP, in partnership with the IMA, asks that you join the movement to address these issues. Put action into motion so that one by one we can resolve some of these problems. In 1776, the start of the Arizona Revolution, the cry was for justice, and they fought. In 1861, the start of the Civil War over slavery, the cry was for justice, and they fought. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which was a cry for justice. And we fought, not with violence, but with a commitment to action. Today we hear a louder cry for justice. What will we do? Freedom has never been given easy by the oppressor. We must fight by taking action, fight unjust laws, put much needed laws into action, elect responsible people into political office, and holding them accountable. Join the movement, be a part of the fight. Let's not let another African American die senseless. Real justice for Trayvon means justice for all of us. Thank you. I will turn this over now to Yvette Sykes.
Good evening. I am your facilitator this evening, and my name is Yvette Sykes. We'd like to bring to the podium Reverend LeBryant Friend from Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church. Sorry.
All right, I wanted to be sure I knew what I was coming to the podium for. All right, so let's pray. All right, let's pray. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for this evening where we can gather together and we can all be a part of a proactive and a positive solution for our community at large. I pray that in everything that transpires tonight, ultimately your name be glorified. I pray that as we delve and dive into different issues concerning racial profiling and concerning the community at home, that God, you help us to uncover what needs to be uncovered, address what needs to be addressed, and ultimately, as a group, as one family, be prepared to move forward together. We love you. We love you for those that are en route. We love you for those that could not be here. And we just pray more than anything, you be glorified in all of our interactions tonight. We give you praise now and forever. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. I'm going to let you know how this is going to flow. Each panel member will be given 2 minutes of discussion. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce our panel. We are so happy that you wanted to be a part of this. Okay. Representing Pima County Attorney's Office for Barbara Luall, Rick Unclesbay. Hold your hand up, please. Police Chief of Police, Roberto Villaseñor. Attorney Kristen Salter, the Chairman, Pima County Democratic African American Caucus. IMA, Pastor Elwood McDonald. Tucson Urban League, Jonathan Peck. City Council Member Richard Fimbres. In Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church, Pastor LaBrian Friend. Attorney Isabel Garcia. Black Women's Task Force, Annie Sykes. And, oh gosh, former councilman, civil rights activist, Tucson Urban League chairman, and radio talk show host, Steve Leal. You can raise your hand, Steve.
Forgot my part.
And this evening we're going to start with Police Chief Roberto Villaseñor.
Good evening. Mr. Peck and I were over here trying to say, how do we get them to start on the other side of the table instead of over here? And I guess we lost. But I'm very pleased. Can you hear me at all?
It's on there.
How about now? Does that help?
Yep. It's all.
Well, can you hear me if I talk
We
up
can
like
hear you
there? Is that better? Okay. All right. I'm very pleased to come here and engage in this conversation. I think that we were talking a little bit beforehand, and this is a tough issue, but tough issues can't be ignored. If you put your head in the sand, then you won't get any resolution. And we need to talk about issues such as this. We need to explore what's going on and listen to what people have to say about it. I think that, okay, wow, now I'm getting a stronger signal. Thank you. I think that whenever you talk about an issue such as this, and obviously with what occurred involving a individual who is saying that they were part of a neighborhood watch and they were trying to, defend their community and everything, and then that caused a lot of uproar. And that gradually steps into, well, why were there not charges initially? What went on with that? And I don't have all the details of the case. I know as much as you do from the media reports and reading the news representations of it. However, I definitely understand that there oftentimes are situations that the law enforcement agencies are looked to for resolution, looked to for action. And when there was none quickly here in this situation, I think that's what caused a lot of the concern, that caused a lot of the discussion. And it's really important when you have these type of events that you get that information out quickly as to what you have, because just stalling and holding on is going to cause more questions. I think that when these type of things occur, you need to be upfront, you need to talk about all the information you have, you need to talk about what the possibilities are for prosecution and so forth. I don't want to comment on their case because I don't know enough about their case. But that's okay.
Time up. No.
That's a good system. However, I do want to be here to listen, to talk about the situations here in Tucson, how we approach things, how we deal with things, and always trying to look for a way to improve our connection with the community and to do things that will help the community in every way. So a lot of what I'm going to be here is listening and responding to inquiries and questions we may have about how we do business here in Tucson. So I'll turn it back to you.
As he reflected about responding to the questions that you may have, as you entered this forum, you were given an index card. On that index card, please write any questions that you may have, because at the end of the panel discussion, we will address these questions, and they'll need to be brought up to me. If I can get someone from the door or the NAACP committee to pass out cards, because they're asking where are the cards. Thank you. Next we have Christian Salter.
Well, yeah, if you can hear me here, I will also echo Chief Villaseñor's comments about this needing to be a discussion that we as a community and communities across America absolutely need to have. But if I can speak just briefly about what I think alternative to race, alternative to stereotyping, and the things that go along with that. We have an issue of gun control in this country. And Bill Cosby spoke of it this past weekend. We just saw that in St. Louis, Wayne LaPierre, the National Rifle Association, was speaking. They had their annual convention there. We've seen a push by the NRA, the National Rifle Association, by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, in states to go into states and work and change our gun laws in this country. In the state of Arizona alone, they're trying to pass legislation to bring guns into schools. They have legislation to bring guns into bars. We've seen a proliferation of gun laws, such as the Stand Your Ground law, which just came to Arizona in the year 2006, just as it has primarily in the last 6 or 7 years for many of the 25 or 30 states who now have this law passed in the books. We need to do more to restrict guns. George Zimmerman was a man who had a domestic violence incident in his past, who had an assault on a police officer in his past. In many states, this would preclude him from owning a weapon. Yet in the state of Florida, there he was, armed, anxious, and ready to go. We need to do more as a culture, more as a society, to push back against the ALEC and NRA, people who are taking and proliferating gun statutes and gun laws in this country, and they are not about public safety. What they're doing is just putting guns into the hands of individuals who may not need to have them in their hands. We need to do more, and I believe that that is an ancillary issue to what we are here today. We have not seen a significant pushback of laws, gun laws in this country by truly the Democratic side of the aisle in quite a long time, in 20 or so years. And we've seen the NRA and other councils run rampant with these laws. We need to do more to that, and that perhaps could have prevented the tragedy that we had with Trayvon Martin. Thank you.
Next, we will have Jonathan Peck.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Sorry. How's everybody doing tonight? Good? Yeah? Good turnout. Everything ditto. I agree with everything that's been said. I think that this is truly a very complex issue. And at the same time, some of it's pretty simple, right? I think about Trayvon's mother. I think about since Trayvon's murder, how many more cases around the country are coming up out of localities like Jersey. The older African-American gentleman, I forgot his name, I apologize, he was a war veteran. Thank you. He pressed his, by mistake, his life alert. Jersey police came in there, tasered him, shot him point blank. After he told the people at Life Alert that he was okay, made a mistake, Life Alert contacted the police and told them to back off. They said, we know how to handle these things. 68-year-old fought for this country, was killed by police. I think about Rico Boyd out of Chicago, shot in the back of the head, right, by an off-duty police officer. Texas, it goes on and on and on. And this is nothing new. This is not new. What is new is the media hype and the sort of the lens and the projection on these cases. But these cases are inside our communities across the country. And the fortunate thing is it's being brought to light about that this is not just isolated incidents, but definitely, as the gentleman spoke before, this is connected to a broader movement around institutionalizing this culture of fear, division, not just through ALEC and NRA, but really there is a pattern that goes back a long time in terms of this mentality, particularly towards African American youth, towards black youth, and towards black men. And it does go back, if anybody is a history buff here, it does go back to the Fugitive Slave Law Act. Read the Fugitive Slave Law Act. Look at the judges when they literally said it's okay, don't interfere with the white master when he's trying to get his slaves back. Read that act. Look at that case law. Now there's some uncanny resemblance to the case law. There's an uncanny resemblance to the quotes of the former police chief in Florida saying, well, there was nothing wrong with it, I didn't feel anything. So there's some uncanny resemblance to how a specific community has been treated historically and up to this point. And now we're seeing more. And you're going to see a lot more, unfortunately. This is not going away. This is becoming an even deeper issue. And what we can do in Tucson is to figure out how do we take all the institutions and the leadership in this room and outside this room and build a culture of cooperation, mutual respect, shared investment, share the resources and assets at the table to create a network that truly embraces our young people, that gives them an opportunity to move on to post-secondary option, that gives them the space and the places where they feel safe. How do we talk about the root issues here? Because the issue on the flyer that you sent out was, could a Trayvon Martin happen here? Well, I think it's very clear. Yes, it could. Let's not fool ourselves. Yes, it could happen here. It could be not just a Trayvon Martin. It could be a lot of different situations. But if we don't build a network of a community of culture and relationships and wrap ourselves around our next generation to move the next generation of Tucson youth and adults and build this community and not be divided by the divisive politics of Arizona. I mean, this is really a tough time in Arizona. And we're feeling the pinch in Tucson. And so rather than retreat into our turf and retreat into our camps, let's take the risk and meet and sit down and really think out what's the blueprint for reducing violence on the streets? What's the blueprint for reducing, decreasing, eliminating domestic violence? What's the blueprint for 100% jobs? What's the blueprint for making sure that every child in Tucson gets a quality education? Let's talk about those issues so that we don't end up here 2 weeks from now, a month from now, and something happens and it gets spin by the media hype, and we're in the middle of the weeds fighting over an issue like this. There's too much at stake here.
Thank you, John. Next we have Steve Leon.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. You know, as I look back at the events surrounding the killing of Trayvon Martin, what stands out to me is not that it happened, unfortunately, because it is sadly not unusual, because there is racial profiling throughout the country. What was unusual about what happened was the clarity of the events. The clarity of the events that made it hard and impossible for the people who usually get away with being dismissive and about those kinds of things, saying, well, it wasn't really true, it was this and that, and everybody gets confused, and then it goes away, and then something else happens next month. This issue was so clear. They have him talking to his girlfriend. They have the police chief and the state attorney going out in the middle of the night, and that doesn't happen. You know, and George Zimmerman's father's a retired Republican judge. Okay? Let's be clear, it's called white privilege, right? White privilege. Okay? You got the police not even using his cell phone to contact his parents. It had him down as John Doe. These things are so clear, America's going to have a hard time engaging in denial. Okay? I think that this is not about reforming consciousness. What do I mean by that? This is not about trying to get a couple confused people to realize they've been thinking the wrong way. No. The racism that creates racial profiling over the decades has also created policies and laws and ordinances that are either bad altogether or are conflicted a little bit because they have corrupted an otherwise good policy, law, or ordinance. And so I think that one of the things that I think we need to do is find them and fix those laws and policies and ordinances in the criminal justice system, in the educational system, and ferret out the residue and litter on the trail that racism has left in our major institutions. That's, to me, the reform that needs to happen. Not changing 13 people's personalities, you know, and getting them to agree we need to go kumbaya or something. We, I think, need to have a working group come out of this and embrace the task, do the yeoman's work of going through the institutions on those policies, laws, and ordinances. And if we're not up for that, we don't deserve what we've inherited, and we're not the people we think we are. If we will do it, we are the people we think we are. You know, when I pledge allegiance, when we all pledge allegiance, you're not praying to Thomas Jefferson's ghost. I pledge allegiance to the flag. There's something else going on in the Pledge of Allegiance. Because when you get to the part where it says, and liberty and justice for all, that the person, when we say that, we're making a commitment to each other that we will assume the responsibility for fixing and making the liberty and justice for all. And that, I think, is what this looks like when we do it. So I think we need to be vigilant. We need to be in it for the long haul, and we need to set about the business of going through those institutions, looking for those policies, ordinances, and laws, and making it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have coming to the mic is Annie Sykes.
Good evening. I'll try and keep it short because I want to leave enough room for everybody's questions to be addressed. Stand your ground. In my opinion, who was standing their ground? Is it an assumption that the 17-year-old boy did not have a right to stand his ground? He just got outstood with a gun. He had a right to stand his ground. This was not an authority figure. We teach our children to obey authority figures, our teachers, our police. But we have a group of children now who are way smarter than, I can say, when I was coming along. They have their own minds. They can think. And at some point, somebody might have said, well, wait a minute. This is not the police. This is not an authority figure. Do I have to listen to what this man is saying? Those are the kind of thoughts that our children have today. This is called Project Hoodie. Project usually means that you're in it until the end. So that means that it's not a one-meeting kind of thing. That we have a project that we have to pursue. And that project is to make sure our children are safe.
If you could pass the mic to Pastor McDowell, please.
A longitudinal, meaning a lengthy study on arrest rates for juveniles in Tucson, indicates, it was done by the Simpson Project, that between 1980 and 2003, the arrest rates for juveniles for drug abuse increased 887% in Pima County. 225% increase happened for African Americans, 72% increase for whites. And there are those who would probably want to say that that has to do with more drug abuse among African Americans, but it certainly is not true. Of course, a larger percentage of the increase were Latinos, which also is important to note. And it is not so because the actual rates of drug abuse among various ethnic groups is right at the same for all youth, white, black, Hispanic, and otherwise. So there's a problem right here in Tucson, at least up until 2003 that we know about, with regards to the focusing of law enforcement agencies on lower income areas versus some other areas of town. And that's one of the aspects we have to talk about. Chris has already talked about the bringing the changing of the statute regarding self-defense in Arizona in 2006. And we do have really virtually a stand your ground law in Arizona, and that deserves a lot more time and attention, and a person like himself is more of an expert on that. But I think these are the kinds of things that Steve Leal is talking about. We do have to really dig in and not let this be just one more fluffy conversation that we can have a Trayvon Martin case right here in Tucson. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I just actually found out about it, but you know, we have to have more discussion. The issue of Trayvon Martin, as many people have said, is really not new. Yes, there was a comment made that it was because he's black and had a hoodie, but behind that is a long history. A history that perpetuates racism, and then we act shocked that somebody acts out their racist tendencies. We have to not only say, oh yes, we've got to find justice for Trayvon Martin's family, but for all of our communities who continue to suffer. Our children that drop out, our children that join gangs. And why? Because our educational systems have failed us. Look at the example here. We have a program that is lifting the dropout rates in TUSD of Latinos. The only program that has that as scientific proof. And what do? They destroy it because we do not want you in the colleges. We prefer you in prison. We prefer you arrested. That is a clear sign. I mean, what other answer is there? If you have a program and you claim that you want success, you don't want them in gangs, you don't want them doing this, you get a program that says, my gosh, our own statisticians tell us what an example this is, and meeting after meeting after meeting with graduates, now on to incredible careers who said, this program saved my life, let's cut it. It's like what we've done even to President Obama. We tell people, oh, you don't deserve this, you're dropouts, you're in gangs, you're violent, you use drugs, you don't go to school, you do all of that. And you have Mr. Obama, Mrs. Obama, both graduate from Harvard. And what happens then? Oh, we change the rules again. Oh, you're an elite. You're not one of the common people, you're an elite. And it's, I mean, when are we going to wake up to the fact that the Trayvon Martins are going to happen? They're a product of our own society. And right now we had seen, you know, some advancements, right? We thought we did. We thought we saw some advancements. We did get some concessions in the 60s and 70s. But there's been a concerted effort ever since then to destroy public education. And they have. Especially when they see the entering classes in the K and kindergarten are children of color. It's not shocking then that they try to destroy public education. We had gains in the courts. What did they do? They took over the courts. We now have what Reagan wanted, a very conservative court. We went after the liberal media. Do you guys know liberal media? I don't know very much of it, but it's Jon Stewart and Colbert maybe. Okay. So they took over the liberal media, and now the FCC doesn't require equal time or fairness rule. They own it all, and now we have super PACs. Are we surprised at what is going on and the increased racism against all of us? We have our Trayvon Martins also in our Chicano, Mexicano, migrant community. How many killings I don't have time to tell you about all the killings. Most of them from officials, law enforcement murdered last year. Carlos Lamadrid, a young U.S. citizen, murdered in Douglas. We just had this Sunday murders of 2 migrants. Even though the media tries to hide it, it really says they really are rival gang members, rival organizations. Why don't they unearth the intelligence that has been found out about the very many right racist groups wanting to do this? This discussion is big. I'm sure I've gone over my 2 minutes, but thank you so much. And we need to continue the fight against racism. That means we must expose the lies that are in the core of every injustice is lies. And it's our job to tell the truth.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. for inviting me. My name is Rick Unklesby. I'm a prosecutor, and so I hope to bring tonight and answer questions that you might have about the process that's going on with Trayvon Martin's case. Like the chief, I don't know any more than what you do, what you've read in the papers, but at least I hope to be able to answer questions that you might have about the process. I see a number of issues that we could talk about tonight. First of all, I absolutely agree with Mr. Salter about the gun issue. The proliferation of guns in our community in Arizona is just overwhelming to think about. The folks that are out there and the laws that we have in Arizona that allow folks to carry guns, to carry concealed weapons, is really a tragedy. So I think that's one issue that I think is really important to discuss. The other one, that from a prosecutor's standpoint, one of the things that I see that was a huge problem in Trayvon's case was the lack of communication from law enforcement and the prosecution back to the community that was affected by the shooting. So much of the outrage that was justifiably shown could have been ameliorated by just the simple act of communication from the prosecution, from the police to the community, simply saying, we're investigating, we're on top of this, we're going to have an answer for you. And I think what a lot of people saw that didn't come about. There just wasn't the kind of communication that there needs to be in these cases. There have been comments about what perhaps should happen to Mr. Zimmerman all through the press, and like Chief Villaseñor said, we don't know any more right now than what's been shown in the paper. And I, certainly as a prosecutor, I don't want to jump to conclusions and talk about someone's guilt in a courtroom yet, because that's why we have these courtrooms. That's why there's going to be a trial, and that's why a jury will make these decisions. But what I hope we can do tonight is talk about the process, talk about what's going to be happening and how we might prevent those kinds of things in our community. Isabel's right. We do have our Trayvon Martin cases in this community, and all of us have the responsibility to try to make sure that we get guns out of people's hands that shouldn't be having them, and protect our children the best way we can. So I hope to be able to answer some of those kinds of questions this evening.
Thank you. Next we have coming to the mic, Pastor LeBron.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. First, I want to say I'm grateful that though it's 2 months overdue, that finally some level of justice will be done in the Trayvon Martin case. I'm grateful, amen, even though the arrest is long overdue, that now George Zimmerman will have his opportunity in court to face what we will see as justice as we know it. Yet even beyond that, I believe that there's a problem that will echo what many of the sentiments have already been said here on the panel today, that must be addressed. And my biggest question for everyone in this room is this: where do we go from here? We can spend another 10, 12 months discussing the injustices of now, or we can start creating proactive solutions to help solve our tomorrow. Whatever we discuss now, we can't change what happened yesterday, but we can begin to put measures in place to help out our tomorrows. So my question is, and my whole assignment on this panel today is to help us to come to healthy solutions as a community at large, not just as an African-American community, but as a community of people that need one another no matter what in order to move forward. Amen. Amen. So that's my 2 minutes.
Yay. And last but not least, Richard Pulis.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I want to thank you all for inviting me to be here today. Tucson to me has always been a very unique community. We don't shun our diversity. We've always promoted it. We've always worked together. This community has always been so accepting to what happens to the rest of this state. With the mean-spirited legislation that we've seen time and time again, attacks on the city of Tucson, Pima County and Coconino, etc. Pockets of democracy that still hold together, communities that still hold together. We have seen this, but I have never seen the amount of racism and bigotry that has risen in the last 3 to 4 years. You know, some people say it's because we have an African-American president, but I don't think so. I think he was very worthy, and he's very worthy to be reelected again because of the issues that he has brought. They attacked him, but I think he saved this country and kept us afloat. I mean, we went through the harshest recession that this country's ever seen other than the Great Depression. And he helped save this country. And yet, all we hear is the negativity. We don't hear about the positive things that are going on. Look at the attacks in our educational system. The public school system has been under attack for years, yet it's getting worse. We just saw a very worthy program dismantled that showed and proved that it was effective for children of color. Now, where's the attacks going to stop? Is it going to stop now that we dismantled ethnic studies programs for the Latino community, or is it going to go on to African American studies? Is it going to go on to Native American studies? Where is it going to stop? And I agree with my colleagues on the panel here. We need to be proactive again. We need to, again, organize like we did with the Klan trying to come into Tucson and establish a base, and we said, no, we don't want you to do it. It's a policy. And I think that we need to continue to grow together, learn together, and work together. And we need to ensure that we have the folks in these high offices and in our police departments, in our sheriff's departments, are reflective of the community they serve. That way you don't have the brutality issues. You don't have the issues that we talk about. They need to reflect our community because they're serving our community. So I thank you all for letting me be here.
At this time, we're on to the questions. So if you have any questions, please pass them to the inner aisle or the outer aisle, and a member of the NAACP will gather those questions. Question number 1. Please explain Tucson's stand your ground law. Anyone willing to take that? Prosecutor?
Okay, I can fill that one. Well, I keep thinking this is not on. I can't even hear myself when I'm tired. As has already been stated, Arizona's statute is almost identical to Florida's statute. And that is that we don't call it in our statute, we don't call it stand your ground, but our statute says that there's no duty to retreat when being attacked by someone. Now, the thing about this statute, and the same thing in Florida, is that if you are perceived, if the facts show that you're the initial aggressor, so let's assume for a moment, and I don't want to get caught up in what the facts are of that case, because I don't know. I wasn't there. All I know is what I read in the paper. But let's assume for a moment that Mr. Zimmerman was, in fact, the initial aggressor. He went after Trayvon. Well, what the law in Arizona says, and what the law in Florida says, if you're the initial aggressor, you don't get to claim stand your ground. You don't get to claim this no duty to retreat. So the initial aggressor, if they're going after someone, and that person they're going after, in our scenario, Trayvon, as one of the panel members said, has the absolute right to defend himself. And if he's defending himself against that initial aggressor, in this case, Mr. Zimmerman, Mr. Zimmerman cannot claim this stand your ground privilege. And that's the same law that we have in Arizona. So someone is not allowed to go after another individual, to attack an individual, and only then to have that person defend themselves, and then that first person who's going to be attacking all of a sudden claim self-defense. The law is not set up that way. And I think it'll be a very interesting trial, because I'm sure the prosecution will try the case in that manner, that Mr. Zimmerman had no right to shoot anyone because he was the initial aggressor. That's how I think the case will be played out. But so our law is almost identical to Florida. So I hope that answers that first question.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to add to that?
when we respond to events like this, where that type of justification is put forward, obviously we're going to look exactly at the issues that Mr. Unclesby brought forward. And I think that he really hit on the important part, is you cannot be the aggressor and then still try and use that as a justification for the result of your actions. And that needs to be taken into consideration. And that's what you share with the prosecution to talk about what would the appropriate charges be. And I think that that's a real important part to key on, the fact that if he would not have been following Trayvon and doing that, you know, he was implored by the communications personnel from the police department not to follow him, and not to confront him. That we had officers, we talk about law enforcement that way, that communications had their officers on the way, and they had told him his job was done, just watch and observe. And I think that's going to be an important part of the case.
One of the things that is relevant in a case that was taken all the way to the Arizona Supreme Court, if a defendant who's being prosecuted for murder in a self-defense situation presents the slightest evidence that he was threatened. In one case, the person was hit with a bottle of water on the head, and he then ended up in a fight killing the other person, and that person was exonerated, given a new trial because, not exonerated altogether, given a new trial, because instruction was not given to the jury that this person did believe that self-defense was evident in the situation. That's kind of a murky thing that it seems to me this statute needs to be reviewed in the way that it's written, not only in terms of things that you all have already mentioned, which I think is great and very important, but there's just a lot of things. I read through all the sections of the Arizona revised statutes when it comes to this, and there's a lot of stuff in there that troubles me.
You know, I agree too. You can't create your own fight and then claim your standing ground. What I'd like to say, though, is that, you know, there is a process. And yes, the person is entitled to all of the rights. I think what's really important in this case is that the regular process was not followed in this case. We have a right to equal protection of the law.
Right.
And not that we're judging and say, you know, convict him and what, but if it were another situation, that individual would have been arrested. Look, we even arrested the pilot who went crazy. Was there any question that he really, you know, just decomposed? And yet he was arrested. Why? Because there's a process. And there was then an agreement about where to go. So our issue is not that we're judging anybody guilt or innocent right now. It's that, and that, you know, the right-wing pundits are saying, you know, it was the pressure and they gave in, the police investigated. But we believe, it's my opinion, that the police did not act as they should have acted. They did not fulfill their constitutional obligation to have equal protection of the law. If he wanted to claim self-defense, well, go ahead like all of us do. We go to jail. We go to jail. And then, you know, you get a bond. And I think that's what's really critical.
I think what's particularly troubling with the stand your ground law and the ethos that it represents is that, you know, oftentimes, in the case of Trayvon Martin at least, we know we had his girlfriend on the telephone just minutes prior to it happening. We had numerous neighbors. We had people hearing 911 calls happening simultaneously to the event. But in many instances, the only person who has any knowledge about the event in these justifiable homicides is the man who's standing there with the smoking gun. Dead men tell no tales. And it's absolutely troubling that we don't have any, in situations such as that oftentimes you have only one person, the person claiming self-defense, that has any knowledge about that event. And that's a particularly troubling part of that statute to me as well. And I certainly think that that's one of the reasons why we should look towards repealing.
Next. Question. This one is entitled Race Relations. people of color have been and now continue to be targets of Arizona diverse politics. What is the first step to getting our communities of color working together, and what's the next step after that?
This is it right here.
Right.
I mean, we're having this dialogue, we're having this conversation. I see a lot of different faces here. I see different races represented here. This is the beginning. But I think, you know, Mr. Lau said it best. We need to engage all facets of our society in this. You know, Mr. Peck said it as well, where, you know, it can't just be those of us in the community here who are conscious, who are aware of these issues. We need to spread it. We need to make our politicians aware of what's going on, what our issues are. We need to engage every level, from bureaucracy all the way on down to just dealing with your neighbor with more respect. You know, in the wake of January 8th, the shootings of last year, we talked about dialogue and what is the level of discourse in this country. Well, right now, it's in the gutter. And we all have a responsibility, I believe, to raise it, to raise that level of discourse, to disagree if we disagree, but to disagree respectfully. And I think that goes a long ways in terms of engendering respect for each other, engendering respect between races, between male and female, all of the issues that we have here. I think dialogue is the best way that we can address it. And we're doing that today, and it's a start.
Thank you. Also, on behalf of the NAACP, they have a number of action committees. And if you're willing to get involved and be involved, you please sign up for them. We have the Education Action, the Racial Profiling Action Committee, and the Political Action Committee. And the sign-up's at the back table.
Can I just quickly say a couple things?
You take too long.
Okay. I do take too long, though. But she's right. I do take too long. So I was like, okay. Just two things. One, we need to create a pipeline of leadership for Tucson. And this is out of respect for the elders here, and I guess now I'm getting to that age. But, you know, there is a dearth of people here that are young, that want to get involved, so we all need to sit down and figure out how do you get the multiple generations working together for the sake of our future and for the sake of tomorrow. The second piece is we also need to ask some hard questions among leadership. And the reality is there's a lot of turf. There are issues between blacks and Latinos. There are issues that we have to address among ourselves. And I think we need to stop pretending that we have to have this closed door discussion. We need to have an open and honest discussion among leadership across the board. Look at the issues of race, class, and gender. Look at these issues of sexual orientation. Let's have an honest discussion about what the issues are. And let's understand that everybody is suffering right now. There's not a single group that isn't feeling the impact of the Arizona state politics and this racism and all these things that are happening. Right. And so we've got to figure out a common ground strategy, but also figure out how to have those hard conversations, open, transparency, be honest with each other, and then let's work towards the better good. We may not just agree on a lot of things, me and Pastor Friend here. I use it as an example, even though we haven't met, we're going to meet tomorrow. But the point being is we need to work together regardless of our differences so that we can move together the institutions that reflect and represent your communities. These are institutions, the NAACP, the churches, there's a lot more that need to be revived with new leadership, new energy, and it's up to us to wrap ourselves around these institutions, uplift them, and fill them in with soldiers and people so we can move on one movement.
Thank you. That was too long.
That was too long. I agree.
Next question. Does TPD give guidelines, or do they train neighborhood watch groups?
I guess that's for me. We used to have a very strong neighborhood watch program within the city of Tucson. Unfortunately, over the past few years, the funding for a lot of programs within the city has become much scarcer. And it's not really an organized program at this point the way it used to be within the department when we had a crime prevention unit. If a neighborhood does show that they want to establish a neighborhood watch, we will give them guidelines of what they do, and most of the time, they usually just want to get the signs. to be honest, is what they want, is the signs in the neighborhood to let people know that people care and that people are watching what's going on. And there is an important aspect for the signs, so we don't deter that. And we give direction on how to get that. It requires a certain level of participation, some meetings to occur within the neighborhood, because the best thing is to get people talking to each other and get to know your neighbors and what's going on in the neighborhood, so that you can determine what actually is suspicious and what is someone just walking through the neighborhood. And that's an important component. But as far as formal official training, we don't provide that type of service. We do provide through citizen police academies. And those are open to the entire community, where we talk about the different things that affect the community, what you can do to get involved in the community, and how you can make your neighborhood safer and better. We do try and go out. We have, the National Night Out, or the Get Arizona Involved in Neighborhoods now, because National Night Out is in the middle of our monsoons, and every year it got blown away and rained away, so we moved it more to October, where we can have some time to go out with people and talk with them, and talk about the importance of bonding together to try and work on the issues. But as far as a formal training program, that's something that hasn't existed for a number of years. And we would never talk about confronting anyone. We would talk about just observing and reporting.
I think some of the other mechanisms that have been put in place is the neighborhood associations. There are many, like in my ward, which is Ward 5, there are 35 different neighborhood associations that work together. And I know that one of the first things they always ask about is public safety issues. And they're always usually asking for a police officer to be present, to assist, and to give you an update of what's going on in their area. And then the police officers also provide tips on how to better protect your home, and et cetera. So it's about organization. I know that several of the faith-based community groups in my ward have also done some training to help individuals and how to better organize their community. Resources have dwindled because of our economic situation, but I think that people working together and creating collaborations and partnerships, you're able to stretch those few dollars that are out there and still get your mission or the issue taken care of.
If I can add on to this, because I forgot that one of my bosses is at the table with me, and so I don't want to give the impression that we don't get involved in the neighborhoods. It's just not a formal program. Councilmember Fima is exactly right. When these association meetings take place, they often contact us and they ask us if we can have an officer attend. A lot of this work has fallen to my command staff now, because I need the officers on the street to respond to the calls. But we have the commanders come out there and they'll do some investigation, what the crime numbers are for the neighborhood. They'll talk about what the biggest trends are that they see going on in the neighborhood. And they try and engender more community involvement, because again, that is what helps out with the situation. We do patrol on a beat type basis. However, because our call load is so high, the beat officers are often called out throughout the entire division they work in to respond to calls. So the beat integrity is not what I would like to see it at, but eventually that is something I hope that we can accommodate as our staffing numbers increase in future years.
Next question. A successful boycott of Arizona was necessary to get MLK Day adopted. Should we start another boycott until they rescind the gun laws and racist laws? Anybody can step up.
That's not mine.
I'll say something. I don't know what the answer is there, but let me tell you. Working people have very few options. What are they? Well, I came from a union family. My father was a union organizer, the mine mill and smelter workers. Union brothers and sisters of all colors, working very clearly against capital, right? It was the mining companies. And, for us, it was very clear that strikes were a very important mechanism. Very important. And economic boycotts. What else do? We demonstrate, we lobby, we do many things. Our community should be proud, both black, brown, Indian, that our communities have worked really hard to change and reform. Look at these children that chained themselves to a desk last year, April the 26th, right? People do things to have an impact in a nonviolent way. And boycotts are effective. They're extremely difficult, as you know. But the boycott of Arizona, which is now very controversial, the boycott of Arizona had the impact, and make no mistake about it. It wasn't our letters, our calls, none of it mattered. What mattered is that last summer, just as they were about to vote for HB 1611, that did everything similar to the black codes back after slavery, to tidy up everything else we could do to the immigrant that we hadn't done with 1070. Do you remember? HB 1611 was about to be passed. And the night before they passed it, they received a letter from the top 60 CEOs of the state telling the Republican legislators, some of it very problematic in language I disagree with, saying, we understand all the problems about the illegal aliens, and we understand why you did this, but you've gone too far. Our economy in Arizona has suffered. And that's what caused them to stop 1611. So are boycotts difficult? Extremely. Can they be effective? Yes. Poor people have no other options.
So I am going to go out there as a civil rights agency and say, yes, if necessary, economic and social boycotts can be applied if necessary, and that decision has to be made by the people on the ground and the institutions from that local region. Everything we have came out of boycotts. Let's not understand the civil rights movement. It wasn't just the march to Washington. There were economic and social boycotts in every black community across the country. Let's not mistake that. So yes, if necessary, they can be brought to bear. And I want you to know we had Harry Belafonte here this past March, and basically his message was that we've done this before. His message to Tucson was that this has happened before in Mississippi, it can happen here in Arizona. As a civil rights agency, absolutely. We look at all the tools necessary in terms of nonviolent direct action. The other question is, since when did immigration become public enemy number one? Since when did we, as a country of immigrants and indigenous people, become such a divisive issue? Right? We know about the racial profiling. Black people have been enemy number one since the beginning. That's very clear. So let's figure out how to work with our black and brown coalition and our white coalition. Let's build the rainbow coalition and take back the state. So absolutely, if necessary, we should demand it. And the last thing is, but not many people know this, but there were a lot of black-led organizations that joined the boycott around SB 1070. And some of you are nodding your head, but there were a lot of black groups, a lot of black fraternities, sororities, the Urban League, a lot of groups nationally pulled out of Arizona. So it wasn't just a brown issue. Let's be clear. We fought side by side with our Latino brothers on this issue and sisters.
I think there are some tools and weapons that exist today that didn't exist years ago. And that's the internet. All of you have watched what happened when Sandra, I think her name was Sandra Fluke, the young woman that Rush Limbaugh insulted. And how many sponsors did he lose? Because they're not only the stuff on the news, but online petitions to those corporations. Increasingly, America is finding out about an organization called ALEC. Arch right-wing think tank, Johnny Appleseed of evil, going around this country, buying legislators, writing the legislation for them, and then grafting it, no pun intended, into legislation all over America. That's where all the stand your ground laws came from. Walmart chairs the committee in ALEC that pimped this around America. Now there are a whole lot of corporations that are running away from ALEC because there are online petitions taking it to them saying, we know you're a member and we don't like it. And they are stepping away. We're talking about Sears, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo. Now those are things we can do that don't have the side effect of injuring an economy and a bad economy. So I think it's like we need to turn the shotgun into the sniper rifle and figure out how to be, very effective going after these corporations, peeling them away from these right-wing legislators.
Thank you. What are the new risks for people of color from the recent Arizona legislation endorsing a volunteer militia not supervised by law enforcement?
Well, the right wing was upset with the federal government over Fast and Furious.
He's our chief. He's with us.
But now the right wing wants to give guns to some other group they like. What are we going to call it? Slow and specious? What hypocrisy.
The Arizona Chiefs of Police came out in opposition to that legislation. And we also have taken stance in several different bills that have been mentioned tonight. I'm sure that many of you remember that I also spoke out again SB 1070 and the issues that brought about and the way that will make a second class of citizens, and it will target individuals based upon how they look, and it will take away resources that we need to combat crime locally and not deal with federal issues. And that's my concern, is that it seems more and more of the problems and issues that a lot of them are federal in nature are being put at the hands of local government, and that's not the responsibility that we are there for. So I think that I will, I know that I will continue to stand for the issue of what we are there for, which is public safety for everyone who is in this community. It doesn't matter if you're here, you have a right to be safe. Now, does that mean that issues occur that we can't be questioned about? Absolutely not. We deal with questions about how we do things and our policies and our procedures all the time. I was taught once by one of the leaders I greatly admire is you never are afraid to open yourself up to being questioned, to open up your books. Because you can't be ignorant enough to think that in an agency this large, in a community this large, that there might not be some issues that come up that need to be addressed and some injustices that need to be looked at. So I'm never afraid to do that. But I will sit here and I will defend my agency because I have a lot of good people working for me and they're out there trying to serve the community because they are part of this community. Mr. Leal said earlier how we need to represent our community. I tell you that we do. We purposely go out and recruit in areas to try and represent our community. Can we do better? Absolutely. We can always do better. But that is a goal that we have, and that is something that we try and do because we strongly believe in serving this community. So that's all. I just want to say that. Thank you.
The issue of creating a militia should really frighten all of us. I mean, it really is unbelievable. Unbelievable that this is where we've gotten. And, you know, I agree with everything that's been said, but again, I think we have to go even deeper. You know, yes, most law enforcement, Border Patrol, all of them have stated they don't want vigilantes. But you know what they say? But give us the money. Right? And really, have vigilantes and other wrongdoers of that nature ever been prosecuted or really done much? Yes, there's a case that something was done that was the right thing. Of course, I don't believe in the death penalty, so I think that was wrong. But they prosecuted Shauna Ford and Mr. Bush and Mr. Gagiola for the brutal murder of Brianna and her father. Right? I mean, it's unbelievable, and most people across this country don't know about it. But that was a murder that was an open, and it was not migrants and what have you. However, law enforcement as a whole, and I'm not criticizing TPD or anything, I'm talking federal government, state government, has done little to curb the vigilantes. The vigilantes you don't hear about anymore. You know why? Because we allowed their voice to be stated over and over, even by Border Patrol themselves saying, oh, they have a right to be in the desert just like, you know, Derechos Humanos does and that kind of thing, and never doing anything to them, and with the media proclaiming their voice every single night, we now elected anti-immigrant folks. We don't need their voices anymore, but make no mistake that I'm not talking about all law enforcement, but many of law enforcement do possess the very fundamentally wrong assumptions about immigrants, just as they have wrong assumptions about African Americans. And the truth is really, the solution here is that everybody should have the rich education beginning in our kindergarten schools, that everybody should learn the richness of Africa and the African history, that everybody should learn about the Americas and our contribution. Until then, we're going to have races wherever, whether in law enforcement, whether in retail, whether in business. That really is the key. And we cannot just, you know, make statements that are against the militia without addressing getting at the core lies about racism here.
Right.
I think that what is particularly troubling about many of these militias is the ideology that they represent. You know, we've seen them as many times as well as an arm of politicians of the state.
Right.
If anybody's familiar with J.T. Reddy, he is a neo-Nazi, and he patrolled the Pinal County, the border areas with other neo-Nazis. Now that ideology is scary, it's old, and it needs to be fought against, but who was he tied to? Russell Pierce, a man who's running again. And so we need to combat not only these militias, but the ideology that they represent, because they take that ideology, go out into the desert, and they stereotype, and they have the preconceived notions that Ms. Garcia was talking about immigrants, when it comes to our communities, just as George Zimmerman was doing. Right. You know, he had a militia mentality, and he took that mentality to the streets of Sanford, Florida. That very same thing can happen in our community with individuals who carry that same mentality. And it's reckless, and it's wrong, and it's a shame that our legislature allowed that to happen.
And it's more dangerous. What's more dangerous? The enemy that you know or the one that's wearing the suit? Let's be clear about this. Our history and civil rights, we knew about the White Citizens Councils. We knew about that elite white group that was running governor's offices, running law enforcement, running these institutions. We also knew about the KKK.
Okay. Next question. We have our police officers stopping drivers for driving while black. What training is being given to TPD to put an end to this practice? Also, how can we educate our children and youth on how to behave when approached by the police? That's your question right there. Go for it. Go for it.
First off, I'm sorry I wore a suit.
I knew to wear a t-shirt. I heard about suits, but you know, I have suits.
I've seen you in suits. You know, this is a very difficult question for me to answer because in my heart, and I understand that we're going to differ on this one. I know that some of you definitely believe that that occurs the driving while black stops. And I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. I'm not going to try and go down that path. But what I'm going to tell you is that we recognize the issues with bias-based policing quite some time ago. We held several community forums to discuss this issue. We talked about what we could do as a community to try and make sure that this is something that we are not known for. This is not how we practice police services within this community. We continue to provide training within our academy about diversity issues. We talk about the perspectives that people have when you stop them or interact with them in any capacity as a police officer. The slightest thing can be misconstrued. The slightest thing that you may not notice or you may not intend can be interpreted, and so you always have to be aware of that. In order to do that, we try and educate our officers about the different communities that exist within Tucson, the different cultures and the different perspectives that they will encounter on their day-to-day operations. Am I going to sit here and tell you that there are no officers that ever let bias-based influences affect their actions on the department? No. We represent the community, and the community has that happen, as Ms. Garcia said, every day in every facet of life, in sales, in service industries, in construction jobs. Every single trade, every single profession has issues with bias-based conduct and actions. The police department represents the entire community, so we're not immune to that either. But what I will tell you, when it's brought to our attention and when it's brought forward, we will investigate it and we will take the appropriate action to deal with it. We try and teach our officers about the importance of making sure that their decisions and their actions are based upon law, not upon personal feeling. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to work with the community to accept complaints and ideas and have discussions and work to make sure that we provide the best service possible. That's all I can say about the issue. Like I said, I know on some of you I will not convince that it's not prevalent, but I will stand behind my officers because I do believe in them. Thank you.
I just want to add to the chief's statement that the city council is very vigilant on this issue, and if you have an issue that you don't feel you're receiving enough from you can call our council offices. There are also other mechanisms in place, like the Office of Independent Police Auditor that's available. The Citizens Police Advisory Review Board is another mechanism utilized. Office of Internal Affairs is another area where you can also present your complaint. And we also have the city's Tucson Human Relations Commission that tries to take a proactive approach to getting out and talking about issues and how do we form better working relationships with our police department, not only with our police department, but every city government agency that we have within our city. But these are mechanisms that you have in place. Like I said, we're very vigilant and we constantly are in contact with our local law enforcement folks to ensure that the safety of our community is at the utmost when we're dealing with these issues.
And also, I do want to point out, I did bring some members of my internal affairs unit. If you could stand up, please, so people can identify you. If there are complaints or issues, I do have people here that are willing to take the complaints and talk to you about what your issues are.
I just wanted to add one thing about that. I've been dealing with, as a prosecutor, with the Tucson Police Department for over 30 years now. And you know, I'm not going to stand here as you know, a white guy standing up here and telling you I know what you have been through in your lives, but there is clearly to me not a culture of that type of thinking that goes on in the Tucson Police Department today. Now, that's not to say that individual officers don't have their own biases, but I've dealt with police agencies around the state over the past 30 years. And I can tell you, I mean, I have seen that kind of a culture in other agencies, and you don't have to go very far north to see that they have some real problems in another community a couple hours up north of us, where there is a culture from the top that goes down to the various folks that work for them. But I mean, particularly since in the last 10, 15 years, I mean, I think that the professionalism of our city police department is extremely high, and you don't see that kind of pervasive cultural problems within the department. So I just want to echo that, what the chief was saying.
Well, just to deal with the second part of that question just for a moment, I think that most people in this room would quickly agree that the mentality and the perception of the generation that's coming up greatly differs from what many of you grew up in, even from what I grew up in. There are things today that young people would do that I would be afraid even to this very second to do, especially dealing with authority and respecting authority and honoring authority. So I believe that there has to be a place where we come back and even readdress the generation that's coming. We readdress them to restore honor to not just parents and not just to those two in authority figures, but restore honor to themselves, because it's impossible to respect others if you can't respect yourself.
I just want to say one quick thing. I have heard some horror stories about racial profiling in the Tucson Police Department. It doesn't mean that every single officer is doing that. However, I hope that with the internal affairs people here, not only with them, but with the NAACP, the Urban League, the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, and other black organizations and Latino organizations, that we will actually start collecting stories, and that we should try to vet those stories and find out how much is actually going on, because even when the police department does its own investigations, sometimes things can fall through the cracks, and it may seem like something is not real from their perspective, but from ours it may very well be. So I think we need to make sure that we don't kind of brush this aside. I respect the chief for defending his agency and for making all the efforts that he has made, and the former chief as well, to try to make the culture of Tucson Police Department a good one. However, we must make sure that if there really are cases, and I've heard some pretty horrible stories, that they will get a hearing, and that we can collect all the stories and make data out of those stories.
I think that you ask questions for things not necessarily because you think something's wrong per se, because you can raise the same question to fix something that's wrong, but use the same information to keep something that's good. So I think if we, and I think the chief hears questions more that way than not, that simply raising the question is not necessarily a condemnation of the department per se. Now, we've been talking about racial profiling or driving while black. I have a variant question, and it's really sort of has its origins in a mythology in my head. And I'm going to use tonight to try and get some clarification of this mythology in my head. For a long time, and I mean it as a straight up question, I have heard about a category of infraction called contempt of cop. Now, it's about kids. Now, we want our kids to be more respectful, but in the meantime, they're going to be kids. What's that mean? They're going to be dumb. They're going to be impulsive. They're going to be stupid. They're going to get nervous too quick. Now, police officers are about control and deference. And that's okay and easy to happen when you've got an adult. But when you've got kids who are dumb, impulsive, and nervous, and might mouth off, you've got a recipe for disaster. So I've heard for some time, and I really don't know if it's true, about a number of kids getting arrested, like, I'm going to show you now. You mouthed off to me, now I'm going to take you to jail. Now, a whole lot of things then, if that's true, then there's some things that happen. Child's not got a record, city's spending money it don't need to. And so my question is, does this sort of thing go on? Does it go on enough to be a problem? And if it is a problem, is there any training at the academy or in any other way that tries to get at this issue so the officers are sensitive to it?
When I first became an officer, I think that that was a situation that occurred much more prevalently than it does today. And I think that, as someone else mentioned earlier, the professionalism of the whole law enforcement field has increased dramatically over the past couple of decades. And I think the accountability through the increased communication capabilities of society as a whole has led to that as well. There are financial repercussions if officers arrest people, and especially if they're arresting them without cause. The term contempt of cop, dealt with issues when an officer would get mad and then arrest someone. It might be a legitimate arrest. It may be a charge that can easily be proven, but is it the best resolution for the incident at hand? We try and talk about that with our officers and to say, is it more important that you take someone to jail for a very minor misdemeanor as opposed to being out there for that rape or that robbery that's going to occur? You get to them for that in a guttural type of feeling because they want to be there for that rape and robbery. Again, am I saying that it never ever occurs now? Probably not. It does occur occasionally. When we are made aware of it, do we take action? Absolutely. Do I expect my supervisors to be watching every night what their officers do? Yes. That's their job, to be out there to make sure that the arrests are legitimate, that our actions are legitimate. Because the first person I'm going to go to is the supervisor of an officer and say, did you give authority for that arrest? Were you aware of that arrest? Did you approve the booking of that individual? Earlier it was talked about the representation of people of color in the judicial system, particularly in the juvenile system. Tucson, the Tucson Police Department has taken part in the minority representation judicial system for quite some time as part of the study where we have tried to help find out information about that issue and how best we can help eradicate that through law enforcement. We're not afraid to address these type of issues. And so, Mr. Leal, I think that what you're talking about was probably something that was much more prevalent a few decades ago, but I think we've made great strides in reducing that and making sure that it doesn't happen now.
I appreciate your response and your attention to it day to day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just say one thing? This is not a youth issue, it's a community issue. I'll speak for myself. My heart does skip a beat when police officers drive by me. I'm going to be honest with you, as the president and CEO of the Tucson Urban League, it's a conditioning. And if anybody out there says differently, I'd like to sit down and figure out how you made it through high school, you made it to being an adult, and not have that issue come up with you. So this is a community issue, right? And I think one of the issues is our young people in our communities have the fundamental right to know the laws and the responsibilities under the law, period. So we should be teaching everybody what the laws are in terms of stop and frisk, search and seizure, all those laws that looks at the engagement between officers and civilians. What constitutes an arrest, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the laws that we should be learning ourselves. Most adults don't know these laws. Most people do not know these laws. So this is not an issue of, well, it's a dumb kid and a smart adult. Most people don't know these laws, period. It's a fact. And so this is an issue across the board where are we learning the laws that we're being governed by at the base level? What are your laws? What are the search and seizure laws? When you get stopped, what is the procedure? How do you interact with police officers? What can they ask you? What can you give up and not give up? When are you under arrest? These are things that can be taught in partnership with law enforcement, in partnership with lawyers and community legal clinics, Legal Assistance Foundation. We can create a partnership where we teach street law education to everybody so we're a more informed citizen. And it helps law enforcement out, it helps everybody out.
Before I pass this thing, I just want to point out, I still get nervous when a cop pulls in behind me as well.
Okay, I'll be real brief because there's more questions. I want to pose like a question, and it might be a little uncomfortable, but it appears to me that since 9/11, there's been a growing deference given to law enforcement. Not our local necessarily law enforcement, but all across the country. We've actually become a more criminalized, more militarized society as a whole. There's no doubt about it. We started really again, practicing on the immigrant, and and I also respect that the chief defends his department, but we have many cases of people that feel they're racially profiled, and then they call the Border Patrol. And there we have families separated, and he knows that we've got that issue. And in terms of the youth, and that they're different than us, I think that our youth are our product, and if we want the youth to respect us, we need to show respect for our youth.
What can be done to get more younger people registered to vote, but not only registered to vote, but to understand what they're voting for?
I think what the city of Tucson did this last election was unprecedented, where we went to an all vote by mail ballot. And it was a mail ballot to your house, so there were no polling places. And we saw a 36% increase in Ward 5 voting participation, a 26% increase in Ward 1, which are predominantly citizens of color that live in these two predominant wards. So we did see it. In fact, we saw an increase in all voter participation in all the wards. So it was your ballot going home, and we explained the issues. We had forums on what was happening, who was running for city council, and what some of the other issues were. And it was able to get people to, it made it easier. Not only for our young people, we've also, Steve started to practice in Ward 5 where seniors would start getting their registration, to start registering folks when they're a senior in high school so they can be ready to vote. So you can do that 6 months up to their 18th birthday. So that's a practice that we still have going with some of the Sunnyside and some of the other school districts that we have, parts of TUSD. So those are things that we have done to try to educate them to how important that is. That's their voice in our community, is their voting right. And that's why we try to encourage more and more folks to do it. Not only did the Pebble help our young people, but our seniors, because they kept changing polling places from year to year because of the cost, the ADA responsibilities, the lack of training volunteers to come in and work the polling places. And with that, we're able to help our seniors vote and still carry on their voice. So those are the things that we have done.
Richard's right. It's the reverse of voter suppression. You know, a couple of years before I left office, we made a concerted effort to establish a partnership with every school district in Pima County, where a voter registration application was connected to the diploma, so the night of graduation, the child got handed both. You know, you're matriculating from school, this other piece of paper is to help you matriculate into political power. Right? And Richard's good to have continued that in Ward 5, but we need to resurrect that countywide again because, you know, there's children all over the place, and that's such a simple thing to do. You have a captive audience. They're coming to graduation. Give them the registration right then and there. It works. Make it simple.
Commercial break. Voter registration is in the back.
I just want to say that there is a move on a national scale in a lot of states where there's a big move for voter suppression.
Yeah.
Not having that ID, not having that driver's license. They have Florida, a lot of the states in the South, a lot of the states that carried Obama laws have sprung up to suppress the voters there. And as you know, a lot of us will not have that ID, or you lost your driver's license. And once they put that into effect, it's going to affect the big elections that are coming up.
Can I just say quickly, there's also a lot of groups that are occupying the vote for 2012. The National Council La Raza, the National Urban League, the National NAACP are all working in concert across the country by affiliates and chapters. Fraternities, sororities, and all of our communities are working in concert to launch Occupy the Vote 2012.
Right.
So, for those that go, I think we should do exactly that for the seniors that graduate. But the reality is 50% of our youth aren't graduating. Everybody has to line up, from the community-based organization to the church, to the civic organizations, to the schools. Everybody has to line up, to the health clinics, to the hospitals, and line up and occupy the vote for 2012 and make sure that we push back this voter suppression laws and make sure we don't lose any ground on our civil and human rights.
There is a website that you can sign up for to be a part of emails that go out as to how you can sign these petitions. It's called colorofchange.org.
Yeah.
And you can sign up to put pressure on Walmart and all these other corporations that are doing are supporting ALEC, which is again the culprit in doing these voter suppression laws.
But we need political education. Back in 2006, the voters of Arizona voted for 4 anti-immigrant measures, 4 of them. 2 of them changed the Constitution, one denying bail for certain immigrants who were accused of the more serious felonies, which is most of the felonies. And we also changed the Constitution to deny immigrants the ability to collect punitive damages. And we also, before that, in 2004, had a law that made Arizona the first state to require proof of citizenship to vote, right? Anyway, we passed all the other 4 as well. Terrible, of course, because we had given the vigilante the microphone every night, and of course we voted all these laws and voted. Let me tell you, without political education, we are ignorant. I hate to tell you, almost 40% of the Hispanic vote in Arizona voted for those anti-immigrant measures.
Right.
But because of the slap and the kick in the head we've had, that is, those numbers have changed. And so we at Derechos, we do 3 or 4 citizenship fairs every year, and we do it with political education because people have a responsibility for being aware. My hero from Trans-Africa, Randall Robinson said one time, and I love it, he said the most important participant in a democracy is not the judges, not the president, not the Congress. It is an informed citizen. That's it.
How does a black man have to dress not to be a threat to whites in Arizona? I just read them. Anybody want to take that?
Whoever wrote that question, would you please stand? That's a loaded question. I'm going to answer the best that I can. Once a month, I have an opportunity to meet with the youth and the young adults within my church. And on this past Saturday, we met and we talked from this subject, the power of perception. And the sad thing is this, many people will make inaccurate assumptions about who you are based on what they perceive you are, based on the way that you carry yourself. So that's not to say that all of our young people have to, as I do most of the time, wear bow ties or neckties or a suit. But it does mean that there is a power in the way that you carry yourself that allows people to know that you're confident in who you are and you know who you are. Now, that's not going to change the way that people assume or what people think about you, but I think that once we can, with our young people, as that was stated in the question, let them know that, or educate them that the way that you carry yourself can help curb some of those perceptions off the jump, that it will help them in a better way. And that's not to say that's the only solution or every solution, but I think that that would be a step in moving forward in that direction.
Didn't help Martin Luther King or Malcolm X very much. They got murdered anyway. Sorry.
And they should have a right to wear a hoodie.
Yeah, I certainly think there's something with Pastor saying that you know, if you want to, the idea that if you dress a particular way, or you talk a particular way, you present yourself, but you know, at some point, especially as culture changes so rapidly in this internet-based culture, that style and fashion oftentimes runs afoul of preconceived notions of how we look. We're here on Project Hoodie. And we've seen individuals in solidarity of Trayvon Martin wear hoodies. This is something that has really, from white, you know, students and privileged backgrounds, all the way down to individuals from lower socioeconomic realms who are minorities, wear this hoodie. You know, this design, this hooded sweatshirt. It is not a capital offense to wear any clothing ever. And that is, from my perspective, when you begin to tell students, when you begin to tell young people that you have to curb the way you dress, you have to put your individualism, your creativity aside so that you can appease people who are ensconced in white privilege, who will view you as a threat simply because you're wearing a shirt that has an emblem or a design on it. I simply cannot get behind that notion.
Since the tragedy of Trayvon Martin on 2/6/12, there have been at least 2 to 3 references to shooting President Obama by white broadcasters on national, global TV. What is going on?
Well, that answers the first question about how should you dress.
Right.
Because statistically, we know, even in terms of business in every field, if you look at the race issue, you can have the same counterpart going for the same job, right? And you still won't, there's still a double and triple standard, statistically across the board. You've got POTUS, the President of the United States, that has unprecedented disrespect by American legislators, the American media, and the American community. Never has this been this bad. Now, this is a country where you can make humor of Bush, and believe me, every president has been made fun of, and it's like this. But not a president who has been disrespected, for example, by the head of the Armed Forces Committee. Remember that incident? And you're the head of the Armed Forces Committee, and your commander-in-chief is in the middle of 2 wars. Been that disrespected. So that goes to all this, that goes to the heart of this issue. Now, I'm not saying you have to be for Obama or against Obama or whatever, but I am saying, since when did we get to the point where our chief of commander-in-chief, gets that level of disrespect? Across the board. We've got to take back the politics. We know there's threats on his life from the very beginning. And we know the Secret Service is working double time, triple time across the board. But we've got some stuff to take care of here in Tucson.
You know, when I think about those radio broadcasters who talk about shooting the president, and I think about voter suppression, and I think about racial profiling, and I think about what do those 3 things have in common, aside from racism? It says they are about people that society does not want to share political power with. All right? They do not want the notion of political equality to be real. The oligarchy, the establishment, whoever you want to call them, doesn't want that dream to be real. So they resent the fact that Obama is black and he's president. They resent the fact that black people and brown people are voting, so let's figure out how to make all that go away. What they have in common is both of them, all three of them, Trayvon Martin, represent people that a part of this society does not want to share political equality with under any circumstances at all costs. And it's over, okay? They can't walk away from this because it's too clear, like we said in the beginning. We're not going to accept their denial, their spin, and any other BS they usually mollify themselves on Friday night about. This one's too, they can't wiggle off the hook. It frustrates the hell out of them, and we know it and they know it, and we're going to ride that horse someplace that looks like resolving embedded contradictions in society and in the criminal justice system. The ball is in our court.
I think we have to acknowledge whether a black or brown man is the victim or the alleged perpetrator. We all get it. We all get it. I have to make a confession that after, really crying over my friends that were killed on January the 8th, my next concern was what? I hope it's not a Mexican. My third wish was, I hope it's not a black man. Because if it were either one of them, I would have had to leave to San Francisco. They would come after us. Somehow, if we have somebody who's deranged, mentally ill, whatever it is, all of us as a society have to pay for it. A black man did this crime, all black people are bad. A brown man does it, but then you have Shauna Ford, you have Loffridge, they're white. Do you feel a reaction anywhere? Oh, those white people, they all act the same way. No. And I think we have to address that. That's the issue here. And of course they're going to attack Trayvon now because he was the victim. And his parents are speaking out, so they're going to get threats. If he had been the perpetrator, alleged, we'd get it anyway.
Right. The next couple of questions are for Police Chief. Not to put you on the spot, but are there any African American police officers within the Internal Affairs Unit? And what is the ratio of African American, Hispanic, Native American, Pan Asian officers?
Well, there have been African American officers within the unit. There are Hispanic officers within the unit. We've had a commander who's African American in the unit. Right now, the ratios of the department are, they're going to catch me on that one. I know that they're close to community representation. We're approximately about 35% Hispanic. We do lag behind on African American numbers, but it's not for a lack of trying and recruiting. And I think that there could be a variety of reasons for that. Part of that being the relationships historically between African American and police and law enforcement. I'm sure that is something that we have to overcome. But we do try. But I think our representation is probably around 3%, 4%. And I think the community is higher than that.
5.
The representation for Native American is pretty close to community representation. It's about 1 or 2%. I can't really give you the rest of the numbers off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I probably should have looked that up.
Thank you. We have a governor who doesn't respect authority. How do we respond to her actions and expect our youth to respect those in position when a double standard is modeled? Anybody? Time is of the essence.
So I think there's several answers. One, man, what's my budget look like now? Is this being taped? No, I think the issue here is this. One, in terms of respect, We need to be the better person across the board. Across the board, as leadership, as caring adults, we need to respect everybody in this discussion. We need to show people who are disrespectful, who come from that issue that Steve talked about. We need to show them a different type of America, a different type of Tucson that we can achieve. Two, in terms of the politics, it's about political power. Vote your conscience. Do what you gotta do. If you don't like the issues if you don't like the people representing you at the governor level, at the state level, at any institution held political office, councilman, whatever it is, vote your conscience. You have the fundamental right as an American citizen to be informed and to exercise your right. And don't let anybody take that away from you. Third, we need an agenda. What is the agenda that we're going to put forth? We know what their agenda is.
Right.
Hate, division,
Right.
power, fear, control. We know that agenda. What's our agenda? And then as adults in our own community, if you want our young people to respect, as the pastor said here, we need to respect each other and lead our young people and guide them hand by hand and support them when they go into the fray of the battle. Support the young people around the Ethnic Studies program. Because right now they're going after the University of Arizona. They're going to go after U of A. Don't you believe, for once, they're not coming after us? Support our young people across the board. Show them what respect looks like. And I guarantee you, they will sit with you, they will break bread with you, and they will become your greatest asset in this struggle for human rights.
That's right.
I have 3 more questions. And the last question is very repetitive. But the next question is for Pima County Representative. From a prosecutor's perspective in Tucson versus Trayvon's case in Florida, please explain the unprecedented criminalization of Black youth and the resulting incarceration. Why not more diversion programs versus incarceration like that done for non-minority youth?
Well, I mean, that's a great question in terms of diverting folks out of the criminal justice system, out of convictions and out of prison. And actually, in Pima County, we have a lot of programs, and they're growing in number, to try to take folks who might be on their way to prison and get them some help that they need. For example, Ms. Garcia's office and the Public Defender's Office participates with my office in something called DTAP, the Drug Treatment Alternative to Prison program, in which we are taking young folks who have been arrested numerous times for drug offenses, for using drugs, selling drugs, things of that nature, and getting them treatment in the community. These are folks that would otherwise be headed to prison because they've got 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, whatever it is. But their offenses are offenses that aren't really harming others to the extent that they're possessing drugs, they're using drugs, and we're taking those folks and in cooperation with Isabel's office, the Public Defender's Office, and the Chief's office is involved in this, and taking those folks and getting them community-based help. So that's one example. There are we have a number of diversion programs where folks can go out and do community service, make victims whole, pay restitution to victims. And when those issues are completed, then restitution is completed, the community service is completed, then those folks get diverted out as well, so that they don't get those convictions. We have programs out in the juvenile court. Same thing with diverting juveniles who are arrested and trying to get them so that they don't become adult offenders. So you don't often hear a lot about those programs in the community. The press doesn't report on them very much, but there are a lot of programs out there. Now, the one big kicker, of course, just like everything else that we've been talking about tonight, is money. And even though our office attempts to get grant money, because Pima County isn't the wealthiest county in the nation, you've probably noticed, but we try to get grant money from the federal government, from other resources, to try to expand these programs. And it's tough to do. It is really hard to come up with the money to do that. But I can tell you that with cooperation with the defense folks, with the police department, with the county giving us some money, we are doing, we do have a lot of programs that divert youth and nonviolent offenders into community-based programs, and they've been very successful.
One thing as a defense attorney, what I've seen, and it's certainly true, programs like DTAP and other programs there are certainly limited by funds, because they require a lot of other services to help treat that individual. But one thing that I've seen, and I had the chance last week, and I saw Judge Davis back there, he can speak to this as well, but the stakeholders in South Tucson had a meeting last week with the Center for Court Innovation. And that's an approach that is a community court-based approach. And they try to put services in connection with people who are repeat offenders. Recidivism is a huge, huge issue, and oftentimes having a prior, and the county attorney's office sets these policies, I don't always agree with it, but having a prior in many instances for at whatever level that you're looking for a diversion program precludes you from actually getting into it. So you could have lived your life piously for 10 years after a criminal conviction, but when you get into perhaps another incident happens and you want to maybe take advantage or get diverted from the system, you're not eligible to do so because of standards and practices. I understand to a certain extent why, but oftentimes these draconian measures and these sort of checkmark lists as to who can be eligible for these programs make it very difficult. Now there has to be some interest in it. There has to be some standards for who can get in and who can't, because again, you're talking about a funding issue. But I'd like to see that open more. And one of the things that we haven't talked about today, but certainly does help people re-enter into society and have an impact in society, is sentencing reform. And not only just sentencing reform, which is something that, quite frankly, Republicans are bringing up. I think Cecil Ash from Fountain Hills, I believe, has brought that up. But we need not only that, but an easier path for convicted felons, many who are young black men who are disenfranchised now. We need an easier path to allow those men and women and people in our society who have convictions, who have made mistakes, be able to get back on path and not have those mistakes that they may have made continue to affect them and reverberate into the rest of their lives.
So real quickly, Pima County is one of the counties that's featured nationally in terms of the incredible progress made around this issue, but there still is racial disparity in our juvenile courts. We're still seeing zero tolerance, school discipline that leads into our juvenile courts, a huge percentage. So there are people on the ground that have been mentioned that are working on these issues. We also know, and I could be wrong, Clarence could correct me, but even in terms of the diversion issue, we're still seeing our whites being more diverted to diversion programs than our non-whites. I mean, so the numbers are smaller, the total numbers are smaller, but the disparity still exists in the administrative bureaucracy of probations in the courts. There's also a political issue. Is there a black judge in child and family law here? Not South Tucson. We know Judge Wilson. No, there isn't. It's a fact. I know because my wife is working on some stuff, but so there's some major political issues in terms of leadership with black judges in Pima County and Tucson. And we have to look at the work that's been done and commend the system for doing it, but we also have to monitor it and make sure that that racial disparity gets to zero.
In light of time, this is the last question. In light of time, this is the last question.
You know, at the beginning, we talked about that racial profiling was not the only symptom. Racial profiling was created by racism, but the system is littered with a history of contradictions, whether on purpose or not. And Mr. Salter clearly laid out two really sharp, clean examples of it. And so I think, and so did Mr. Pett, the third one. So I think if we will embrace the task of making our way through the system and ferreting out these kinds of issues, we will have done a huge good thing in our community. And I'm willing to help with any of that.
Forums like this, forums and rallies like this are great, but the results have been the same. History keeps repeating itself. But what priority actions can we take to address the problems we have right here in Tucson? Talk is still cheap.
Well, I think Steve just hit on it. We really have to have a follow-up meeting, I would say no less than a month.
Right.
And we need to organize ourselves, even as we close out tonight,
yes,
around at least 3 objectives, 3 places that we're going to start, and then we need to have another meeting later and bring back the results of what we've come up with and make sure that we follow through with some action. I do not want us to leave here tonight without some sense that we're going to do something.
Amen.
Once again, on behalf of the NAACP, there is an Education Action Committee, Racial Profiling Action Committee, and Political Action Committee. Please sign up in the back. And if you are not a member of the NAACP, we gladly welcome you to become a member of the Tucson chapter NAACP. It's in the back. And I am completing my facilitation of this forum.
I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to come out to this forum. I would definitely like to thank my panelists for coming out and answering the questions. Yes?
I know this is against the protocol, but we talked about where we go from here. Reverend McDowell began a discussion about that perspective and seemed to just went sideways. Where from here?
Okay, we got that. We will have another meeting. We have to set it up. We did not know how many people would come out, so we have to set it up for at least the next month to get it together to see what we will do, how we will do it. But again, I thank you very much for coming out because this is important for Tucson. Thank you.